what truth is, getting at the nature of truth, that has got to be one of the biggest metaphysical questions. Right? Right? Hello and welcome to Attic Philosophy. We're talking about metaphysics, we're talking about language, logic, the mind, social philosophy, environmental philosophy. In this video, we're focusing in on what truth is. Go and check out the previous video on different theories of truth. In this one, we're looking at one particular theory called deflationism. Now, deflationism says all this fuss about the metaphysics of truth, the nature of truth, all of that is misguided because really there's nothing to be said about the metaphysics of truth. So this idea, it takes this big, detailed, heavy notion of truth and it deflates it. That's why it's called deflationism. It's not saying that there's no such thing as truth. And it's not saying there's no theory of truth. Deflationism is a theory of truth. It's a perfectly precise theory of truth. But it says that truth is no big deal, metaphysically speaking. It's easy to analyse. Okay, so let's see how the theory goes. The key idea is the idea of the T-schema, the T sentences. These are sentences that link truth to the world, I guess. Okay, so here's an example. Pick any old sentence like, puppies are cute. That sentence is true if and only if puppies are cute. That's one T sentence, and it's obviously true. Here's another one. The wall behind me is dark blue. That sentence is true if and only if the wall behind me is blue. Again, that's obviously true. It's another T sentence. So the T scheme says take any sentence A is true if and only if A. So you replace A there by any sentence, and that is a T sentence. Deflationism, at least in its kind of rough and ready form, says truth is just that big long list of all the T sentences. So you list out all of those T sentences. Well, you don't list them out because there's infinitely many, but you get the idea. You kind of say T sentences are sentences like that, so we imagine all of them being listed out. And then we say truth is that concept implicitly defined by all of those. It's the only concept that fits that scheme. And that's all there is to truth. Okay, so that is the big point of deflationism because everybody pretty much agrees that those T sentences are true. Deflationism adds to the picture. That's all there is to say about truth. There's no further metaphysical wrangling about is it correspondence? Is it coherence? Does it fit with this pragmatic idea of truth being aligned with the ultimate aim of science? None of that business. Once you've got all the T sentences, you've understood truth. That's all there is to it. Now, deflationists might say there's more to be said about truth, like what is the aim of truth? What is the value of truth? Why do we like to tell truths rather than falsehoods? Why do we trust people who tell the truth? So there's plenty more to be said about how truth works in society. The point is from a theoretical, philosophical, metaphysical point of view. That's it to the theory of truth. So this idea that we express deflationism using sentences could be put like this. So you have this sentence, the wall behind me is painted blue. What do you do when you say that that sentence is true? Well, you basically strip those quote marks off. You go from the wall is painted blue, talking about a sentence, to saying the wall's painted blue, actually asserting that that is a fact. So you go from talking about a sentence to talking about the world. It's just like stripping the quotes off. And you do that by saying is true. This view is sometimes called disquotationalism. Truth is a device of disquotationalism. Basically, it strips the quote marks off the sentence, allowing you to talk about the fact in the world. That's a view associated with Quine. There are a few snags in the way that we set up this picture of what deflationism is, okay? Maybe they're not kind of objections, they are just little wrinkles in the way we express how the theory works. So in the way I just expressed it, I talked about sentences, right? The sentence, puppies are cute, that's true, if and only if puppies are cute. And there's a problem with that. Some sentences are context sensitive. What they express, kind of what they mean, depends on the context they're uttered in. Let's think of a sentence like, I'm talking. Okay, that happens to be true because I'm talking, and in fact, if I say it or if you say it out loud, then it's always going to be true because whoever says that sentence is talking at the time. But now consider the T sentence. I'm talking, that sentence, is true if and only if I'm talking. That can be false. If you said the sentence, I'm talking, that sentence would be true, but you might say it at a time when I'm not talking. So the whole equivalence, I'm talking, is true if and only if I'm talking. It would be true on the left and false on the right, so not true overall. So the problem here is that when we quote a sentence, I'm talking, and just say, is that sentence true or not? We don't take into account the context, who's speaking in this case. Whereas when I say I'm talking, what I express is the proposition that Mark's talking. That equivalence effectively means the sentence I'm talking is true if and only if Mark's talking. And that's obviously false. I'm talking can be true if Mark isn't talking, like if you say the sentence I'm talking. This problem shows that deflationism needs to be expressed in a slightly more careful way. So what we could do is we could talk about not just a sentence being true or false, but being true or false in a particular context. Okay, so a context might include who's talking, where they are, the time. So we could say, I'm talking, as said by Mark, in English, in Nottingham, on Tuesday morning, is true if and only if I'm talking. And that looks like it's going to be a true equivalence in every case. Okay, so if we're going to express deflationism with sentences, we have to be careful to bundle all of the contextual information into our T sentences. There is a bigger, deeper problem with this idea of formulating deflationism in terms of sentences. And the problem is this. If our theory of truth is going to align the truths to the true sentences, then there had better be a sentence for every truth. Every truth has to be expressible. But maybe there's some truths that aren't expressible. Okay, Mark, can you kind of give me an example of a truth that isn't expressible? Well, no, obviously I can't express a truth that isn't expressible. All I can do is try to give you some kind of reasons for believing that there might be inexpressible truths. So, you might have this rich inner life about which there are truths that you have trouble putting into language. Maybe there just aren't the words to capture some of the feelings that are going on inside. Nevertheless, there is stuff going on inside. So there is a truth about what's happening inside, it's just not expressible. Maybe not by you, maybe not by anyone. Maybe it's just a limit of our language. Maybe there are truths about the fundamental nature of reality that aren't expressible in any possible language. It's just too big and complex. This is all very much maybe. It's hard to kind of put a definite argument on that. So let me kind of switch topics and try and convince you that there are inexpressible truths. I'm going to switch the topic to mathematics. Here's an argument that there are more truths than there are sentences that we can express them in. Here's something that sounds true to me. There are more real numbers than there are sentences. Why is that? Because the real numbers are uncountable. If you tried to list out all the real numbers, even if your list went on infinitely long, you would miss some out. And that's a mathematical fact. Why aren't there that many sentences? Well, sentences have to be built up from smaller bits of language, and there's maybe a finite number of words that we can build them up from. Even if there was an infinite number of words we could build them up from, we still wouldn't be able to build uncountably many sentences. So there's more numbers, more real numbers than there are sentences. Take any real number x. It's true that x is a real number, by definition. And that's true for every real number. Okay, so there you go. I've just gestured that there are uncountably many truths about real numbers of the form x is a real number, but we've just said that there aren't that many sentences. So there are more truths than there are sentences, so we'd better not try to capture truth by listing out all the sentences. Here's a better way of doing it. You capture deflationism not by sentences, but by what those sentences express. This is the philosophical idea of a proposition. We're talking about what a sentence expresses, what a sentence says, or what a speaker says when they make some sounds like this. Okay, so you and me might say the very same sentence, I'm talking, but when I say it, I express the fact that Mark's talking. When you say it, you express the fact that you're talking. Same sentence, different proposition. Now, lots of philosophers think that propositions are abstract entities. That at least opens up the possibility that there are more propositions than there are sentences, so we can get around this problem that there are more truths than there are sentences. We line up the truths with the propositions. So we formulate deflationism as follows. We say, take any proposition. The proposition that I'm talking. The proposition that the wall behind me is painted dark blue. That proposition is true if and only if Mark's talking. If and only if the wall behind me is painted dark blue. Whatever. For any proposition A is true if and only if A. Those are the T sentences expressed in terms of propositions. I guess now we should be talking about T propositions rather than T sentences. We list all of those, or we gesture at all of those. They together define what truth is. Okay, now I'm going to talk about two problems for deflationism. And I think both of these are really serious problems that deflationists haven't shown that they can solve. The first problem I'm going to talk about is the infamous liar paradox. If you haven't met this before, this is going to give you a headache. Okay, so we think about the sentence, this sentence isn't true. What's so special about that? Well, if it's true, then it says that it's not true, so it's not true. Okay, so it must be not true. But if it's not true, and it says that it's not true, so it looks like it is true. So if it's true, it's not true, and if it's not true, it is true. Either way, we've got a contradiction, we've got a paradox. There's no bad reasoning going on here. If we write this all out in logic, we can pretty much easily prove that we've got a contradiction there. Just from the existence of this sentence isn't true. Okay, now look, there's loads of different things we can say about the liar paradox. Why is it a problem for deflationism in particular? Okay, so can't we just go, yeah, kind of it's a problem, but it's a problem for everyone, so we can just kind of push it to one side and let the boffins sort it out? I don't think you can do that if you're a deflationist. Why not? Because you're defining truth by listing out all of these propositions. One of those propositions is going to be the liar proposition, or it's going to be the T sentence corresponding to the liar sentence. Built into your definition of truth is this contradictory proposition. That just shows that you've got an inconsistent, paradoxical theory, and we don't want those. So what do deflationists say about this really well-known problem? Well, they kind of don't say much, actually, which is kind of disappointing. One of the most famous deflationist accounts comes from Paul Horwich in his 1990 book on truth. So what does he say? Well, he says truth is defined by all of the unproblematic T sentences. So it's kind of like you go, this one's not problematic, so we put it into the theory. This one's not problematic, so we put it into the theory. Oh, this one is the liar sentence, so we don't put it into the theory. So for that to be a theory, you need to know which ones are the problematic ones and which ones aren't. The trouble is you can't tell in advance which ones are problematic. We can have sentences that are on their own are perfectly fine, but when you add them to other sentences, they create these kind of liar paradoxical cases. There are loads of examples of these in the literature. I'm going to try and do a video specifically on liar sentences and paradoxes, so I'm not going to say too much about that right now. The long and the short of it is, Deflationists, I don't think they've got a good response here, okay? Either they've got a paradoxical theory, which is bad, or they've got no theory at all. Second problem for deflationism. This one is kind of a more technical, metaphysical problem, so yeah, bear with me. Okay. It's kind of a circularity problem, and it goes like this. First up, we have to say what we mean by a proposition. What fixes the identity of the proposition? And one of the main accounts, and I think the account the deflationist has to use, is what's called the Russellian account, after Bertrand Russell. And the idea goes, the proposition is an entity that features particulars, properties, and relations. So the proposition that I'm talking, it's an abstract entity that contains me, the physical entity, me, myself, and the property of talking. So that's all good from the deflationist's point of view. But here's the problem. To fix the identity of a proposition, we first have to fix the identity of the things that make it up, the properties that make it up. In the case of the T propositions, A is true if and only if A, you've got this property is true, the property of being true. So to say what the T sentences are, we first have to say what the property of truth is. So what's the property of truth? Well, according to the deflationist, it's defined by, it has its identity fixed by all of these T sentences. So the T propositions get fixed by the property of truth, and the property of truth gets fixed by all the T propositions. So we have this kind of circularity problem going on there. This stuff determines what this property is. This property in part fixes which propositions we've got in the first place. It's kind of which comes first, you can't say. It looks like you've got this kind of metaphysical problem there. Okay, this isn't a very well-known problem for deflationists. I talk about it in my book on truth. I don't know if anybody else talks about it, so it would be really interesting to know what you guys think about this issue. So there we've had a quick overview of deflationism. It's a super interesting theory saying that truth doesn't have this big loaded metaphysical content like we think it does. That's what makes it a really interesting theory. I think it's a problematic theory because of these two problems that I've talked about, the liar paradox and the identity problem, this circularity problem. It's probably the theory that most philosophers agree with about truth at the moment, okay? I'm one of the philosophers who thinks it's not a good theory of truth. Let me know what you guys think. Leave me a comment. Do you think it's a great theory of truth? Do you think it's problematic? Do you have your own objections? Do you think the objections that I've given work? Let me know what you think. If you've liked this video, hit like, subscribe, get more content like this to your inbox. Okay, that's all for today. I'll see you guys next time.